She slapped my wife right there in court, not outside, not in the hallway, inside the courtroom, right in front of the judge, the bailiff, and 30 silent faces who couldn't believe what just happened. The sound echoed sharp, brutal, humiliating. My wife froze. Her cheek turned red in seconds, her eyes filling with disbelief. Karen, the head of the HOA, stood there, breathing hard, hand trembling, but her smirk steady. Like she'd just proven a point, and everyone else, they just stared. The judge was out of the room for a recess. The bailiff was distracted at the door. And in that 10-second silence, my world tilted. Because this wasn't just an argument about HOA rules anymore. It was personal. It was about power. For months, that woman had made our lives hell. Letters, fines, threats, late night visits. We had moved into that neighborhood thinking it was peaceful. We didn't know we were walking into a kingdom run by one woman's ego, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, the kind who smiled at you at the bake sale, then fined you for parking 2 inches off the curb. It started small, a warning about the wrong shade of paint on our fence. Then about the flowers my wife planted too wild, she said. Then came the citations, one after another. At first, we laughed it off. But when the HOA tried to charge us thousands in violations, we decided to fight back. We took them to court. That morning, my wife was confident. She had evidence, photos, emails, witness statements. We were going to expose Karen's abuse of power, and Karen knew it. She arrived in her power suit, clipboard in hand, 3 board members behind her like bodyguards. But when our lawyer presented the first piece of evidence, a document proving she'd forged signatures, her smile cracked. Then, the shouting began. Karen's lawyer tried to object, but the truth was already spilling out, and my wife, calm but firm, turned toward Karen and said, "You don't get to bully people just because you sit on a board." That's when it happened. Karen's face twisted a flash of rage, pride shattered, and she slapped my wife. The courtroom gasped. The bailiff rushed forward, and in that frozen moment, I swear I could hear my own heartbeat pounding through my chest. My wife didn't cry, didn't flinch. She just stood there, staring back at her strong, unbroken. And I realized something right then. That slap wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because while everyone saw a moment of violence, I saw a confession. Karen had just proved in front of witnesses, in a court of law, exactly who she really was. And from that moment on, I knew what I had to do. We weren't just fighting an HOA. We were about to bring down the woman who thought she owned the law itself. I stepped forward, my voice calm but cold. "You just ended your reign, Karen." The bailiff pulled her aside. The judge re-entered, stunned by the chaos. Our lawyer whispered, "This changes everything." Because what Karen didn't know was that the entire courtroom had cameras rolling, and that slap, that one reckless act, was caught on video. It wasn't just evidence. It was the moment the crown fell from her head. As the hearing was adjourned and they escorted her out, Karen still shouted, "You'll regret this. You think you can beat me." But even her voice trembled now. When we stepped outside the courthouse, the reporters were already waiting. Someone had leaked the clip. By noon, it was viral. HOA president assaults homeowner's wife in courtroom. The headlines wrote themselves. By the end of the day, her board was collapsing. Sponsors pulled out. Members resigned. The queen had fallen, but I wasn't done yet. Because the next morning, something even crazier happened, something that would shock the entire town, and turn our revenge into something no one could have imagined. The next morning, I woke up to silence, not the peaceful kind. The kind that feels heavy, like the air itself is waiting for something to happen. My phone buzzed nonstop. News alerts, messages, missed calls. Karen's slap had gone viral overnight. Every local channel, every social feed, clips freeze, frames, slow motion replays. HOA president assaults homeowner's wife during court hearing. Our small town had become the center of chaos. And in the middle of it, my wife's face, still calm, still strong. That image had broken the internet. By 9 a.m., the HOA office was surrounded by reporters. Neighbors who once hid behind curtains were now speaking up. Stories poured out, fines, threats, harassment. Karen's empire was crumbling in real time. But that's when something strange happened. Something that made me realize the story wasn't over yet. Because when we arrived at the courthouse the next day for the follow-up hearing, the crowd outside wasn't there for us. They were there for her, Karen. She stepped out of a black SUV, sunglasses, suit, and the same smug posture as before. Only this time, her wrists were wrapped in legal documents instead of jewelry. No longer the enforcer, now the accused. But here's where it got weird. As we entered the building, the energy shifted. The same hallways that once felt like her territory were now echoing with whispers. And yet, she walked like she still owned the place. When the bailiff called for order, the judge hadn't arrived yet. The clerk whispered something about a replacement. Apparently, the assigned judge had been transferred some emergency, and in walked the new presiding judge. At first, I didn't recognize her, tall, composed, late 40s, but my wife froze. Her grip tightened around my arm because standing there behind the bench was Judge Rebecca Miles, the same woman Karen had humiliated years ago when she was still a public defender. Rumor had it Karen once got her fired from a neighborhood HOA case over a petty zoning violation. And now, fate had pulled them back into the same room. Karen's confidence faltered for the first time. She blinked, the crowd went silent, court is now in session. Judge Miles said, voice steady as steel. Every word she spoke felt like thunder. She reviewed the footage, the slap, the yelling, the chaos, and then she looked up. MS Karen Whitmore, you stand accused of assault, defamation, and abuse of authority. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Karen smirked, that same arrogant smirk. This is ridiculous, she said. That woman provoked me. They were trespassers. I was defending. The judge cut her off in a courtroom. The tension snapped. You could feel the whole room exhale. Karen's lawyer tried to intervene, but the judge wasn't listening anymore. She turned to my wife and said softly, you showed restraint where she showed rage. The law will remember that. And that's when it hit me, the irony, the poetry, the perfect symmetry. Yesterday, Karen had stood in front of the judge's bench, feeling untouchable. Today, she stood below it, and the woman she once destroyed was the one holding the gavel. It wasn't just justice, it was karma, dressed in black robes. The hearing went on for hours. Every HOA file Karen had ever falsified came to light. Emails, recorded calls, witness testimonies from neighbors she'd terrorized. One by one, her lies collapsed. By noon, the judge announced her decision. The HOA was to be dissolved pending investigation. Karen was suspended from all duties, facing criminal charges, and the fines she'd illegally imposed. Every homeowner would be reimbursed in full. When the verdict dropped, the courtroom erupted. People clapped. Some cried. Karen's face turned pale, the same color as the papers she once used to control everyone. As she was led away, she turned back toward us, and in her eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear, the same kind she'd made others feel for years. But even as the bailiff opened the door, something inside me knew this wasn't her ending. Because women like Karen, they don't just disappear quietly. They plan, they plot, they wait, and sure enough, 3 weeks later I found out I was right. The HOA was gone, but the property it controlled, the same land Karen had fought over, was now under review. Ownership was being transferred. I didn't know to whom, until the day I walked into court to finalize the paperwork. The courtroom door creaked open, and there she was again, Karen, not in cuffs, not defeated. Sitting in the judge's chair, I froze. The world stopped spinning for a second. How was she back? And the look on her face said it all. The smirk had returned. But this time, there was something darker behind it. Welcome back, she said, tapping the gavel. Let's finish what we started. The bailiff called for order. The cameras rolled, and I realized this fight wasn't over. It was about to get bigger, deeper, and far more dangerous than I ever imagined. The sound of that gavel hitting would send chills through my spine. It wasn't just the sound of order, it was a warning, a signal that somehow Karen had found her way back to power. My wife's hand trembled in mine. We both stared at her, sitting there in that judge's chair, calm, composed, almost regal, like nothing had ever happened. But this wasn't the same courthouse. This was a different division, a smaller local review board that handled zoning disputes. And thanks to some political maneuvering and a temporary appointment, Karen had been allowed to preside over the very case that once destroyed her reputation. She wasn't a real judge. She was acting as one temporarily, pending oversight. A loophole, a technicality, but enough to make her dangerous again. She leaned forward, her lips curling. Mr. and Mrs. Harper, she said, voice dripping with false civility. It seems fate enjoys irony as much as I do. Her tone was calm, but every word carried venom. Before we proceed, I'd like to remind everyone that this hearing will determine whether your property still falls within the HOA boundaries. I knew what she was doing. This wasn't justice, it was revenge dressed up in procedure. Our lawyer whispered, "Stay calm, let her talk, we'll expose this." But my wife couldn't look away. Her eyes were locked on Karen. The woman who slapped her in court was now pretending to wear the robe of justice. And yet, as much as it made my blood boil, something about Karen felt different. Colder, desperate. This wasn't confidence anymore, it was survival. The hearing began. Karen read from the file, her tone precise, her fake authority dripping from every syllable. But what she didn't realize was that we weren't unprepared this time. For weeks after the first trial, we'd been gathering evidence. Not just legal documents, digital records, bank transfers, private communications between her and the previous HOA treasurer. We knew she'd tried to buy her way into this position, using favors and influence to rebuild her image, and we had proof. When it was our turn to speak, our lawyer stood tall and pressed play on the projector. First came the email's direct instructions from Karen to falsify reports, then the voice recordings threats made to city officials if they didn't cooperate, and finally, a video, a hidden camera clip from 3 weeks ago. Karen in a parking lot, meeting with a developer, the same man who'd been trying to buy out our land. Karen's voice. Once I'm in that chair, the property line changes. They'll lose everything. The courtroom gasped. The bailiff turned to the judge, or rather to her, with disbelief. Karen froze. For the first time, her words failed her. My wife stood up, calm and steady. "You taught us one thing, Karen," she said softly. "Power isn't about control. It's about truth." Karen tried to speak, but the judge overseeing from chambers, the real judge who had been monitoring via live feed, entered the courtroom at that exact moment. "Ms. Whitmore," he said sternly, "you're hereby removed from this position effective immediately." The color drained from her face. "What? You can't do this." "I can," he replied, voice sharp as steel. "And I will, bailiff." Karen's chair scraped against the floor as she was escorted out. She turned one last time, her voice shaking between fury and disbelief. "This isn't over. You think you've won." I stepped forward, looking her dead in the eyes. "No, Karen, the law won." Finally, the cameras flashed, reporters swarmed, and for the second time, the same courthouse that once echoed with her arrogance now thundered with applause, this time not out of shock, but out of justice. Outside, the wind was calm, the sky clear. It felt like the world itself had exhaled. Neighbors came forward, thanking us. Old residents who'd been too scared to speak now smiled freely. For the first time in years, that neighborhood, the same one she ruled with fear, felt like home again. As we walked down the courthouse steps, my wife looked at me and whispered, "Do you think she'll ever change?" I shook my head slowly. People like her don't change, but the world around them does. And that was the truth, because by the following month, Karen's name was stripped from every HOA document in the county, her license revoked, her reputation gone. She tried to sue, but no lawyer would take her case. The slap she gave that day in court had become a symbol not of power, but of downfall. And in a twist of irony only fate could design, the same courtroom she once ruled through intimidation was renamed. A small plaque by the door now read, "Dedicated to those who stood up for justice, even when no one believed them." It bore my wife's name. That day, as the sun dipped low and the world finally went quiet, I realized something profound. Revenge had never been about fighting back harder. It had been about standing taller. And though Karen's voice would fade from every record and file, the sound of that one slap, the one that started it all, would forever echo as a reminder that sometimes the loudest power is silence.